You know, if someone calls a politician Machiavellian,
Hmm.
you instantly know that is not a compliment.
Oh, absolutely not.
It's shorthand for ruthlessness, right?
Yeah.
For deceit, for that chilling idea that the ends justify any means.
It is. It's a word just loaded with political cynicism, and that whole reputation, it comes from just one small book, Il Principe,
The Prince.
written over 500 years ago, back in 1513, by Niccolò Machiavelli. And this book, it wasn't just analyzing power, it was really a manual for how to get it, and maybe more importantly, how to keep it.
And the sources we looked at really drive home that this wasn't some, abstract thought experiment from him. Machiavelli was a career diplomat. He was a civil servant for the Florentine Republic for more than a decade, and his whole world just completely fell apart in 1512.
Right, when the Medici family came back into power.
Yeah.
And you have to remember the context here. He wasn't just fired. He was thrown out, he was imprisoned, and he was even tortured because they suspected he was plotting against them.
So he writes The Prince while he's banished out on his country estate.
And dedicates it to the very same Medici rulers who just put him through all of that. I mean, in a lot of ways, it's this incredibly brilliant, desperate job application.
It's an amazing gamble, isn't it? It's like saying, here's everything I learned about how power really works from the mind you just tried to break.
Exactly.
So for this deep dive, that's our mission. We want to extract the core, controversial advice Machiavelli distilled from all those years watching power struggles up close.
We're asking what practical, very challenging lessons this text really offered leaders about getting and keeping control.
And the political backdrop is just so important for understanding why these lessons were so brutal.
It's everything. You're in the Italian Renaissance. So on one hand, you have this explosion of genius, Michelangelo, Da Vinci, but on the other, political chaos.
Because Italy wasn't a country.
Not at all. It was just this fractured collection of city-states, always at war with each other. Florence, Venice, Milan, the papacy. And they were all easy prey for bigger powers like France and Spain, who were just constantly marching through. He was writing a survival guide for a really brutal world.
Okay, so let's get into his method. Because his first really revolutionary move, it wasn't political, it was philosophical. He just completely broke with tradition.
Oh, he shattered it. Before The Prince, most political writing was in this mirror for princes tradition.
Which was basically telling them how to be good, moral, Christian leaders.
Exactly. It was all about how a prince ought to live. And Machiavelli comes along and says, essentially, that's nice, but it's useless.
Right.
His work is based completely on historical examples and just, concrete observation of what powerful people actually do, not what they should do.
And that shift from the ideal to the real is why a lot of scholars say this book basically founded modern political science.
It did. And it brings us to his most famous and maybe his most cynical point in chapter 15.
This is the core of it, I think.
It is. He says, and this is the idea you really need to grasp, the gap between how one lives and how one ought to live is so great that anyone who neglects what is done for what ought to be done will sooner learn how to destroy himself than how to preserve himself.
In other words, if you insist on being the good guy in a world full of people who aren't, you're just signing your own political death warrant.
You are. And once you accept that, the state itself becomes the ultimate goal, an end in itself.
So the prince's main job is just stability, maintaining the order.
That's it. Every single action is judged by that one standard. It doesn't matter if it's morally wrong. If it secures the state and does it quickly and permanently, then for Machiavelli, it's a politically effective move.
The book itself is structured almost like a military briefing. He classifies the different kinds of states, and then he immediately gets to what he sees as the two foundations of any state.
Good laws and, this is crucial, good armies. And from there, he goes straight into the really controversial stuff, how a prince has to act to keep those foundations from crumbling.
And on the subject of armies, he just immediately unloads on the system that Renaissance Italy depended on.
Mercenaries.
He'd seen firsthand how badly that could go.
Oh, chapter 12 is just a complete demolition job. He calls mercenaries useless and dangerous. He says they're, quote, disunited, ambitious, undisciplined, and disloyal.
Because they're not fighting for you, they're fighting for money.
Just for a small wage? And he says that's not enough to make them want to die for you. If someone makes a better offer, they switch sides. If things get dangerous, they just run.
He even blames Italy's weakness on this. And he uses this one really humiliating example about King Charles VIII of France.
Yeah, he says Charles took Italy with chalk.
With chalk? What does that even mean?
It means there was no real resistance. His soldiers just walked through Italy, marking the doors of the houses where they were going to stay with chalk. The mercenary armies just melted away. For Machiavelli, this was a national shame.
So that context explains his whole conclusion then. Mercenaries are a huge liability. He also says auxiliaries' borrowed troops are even worse.
Much worse. Because if they lose, you fall with them. But if they win, you're completely in their debt. And you might just get conquered by your so-called allies.
So what's the only option? What's the only reliable military force?
It has to be your own army, an army made up of your subjects, your citizens, your own people. It's all about self-sufficiency. He says, nothing is so feeble and unstable as the reputation for power that is not based upon one's own strength.
And he's not kidding about how brutal you need to be to achieve that.
Not at all. He points to Hieron of Syracuse, who realized his hired troops were useless, so he had them all killed and replaced them with his own citizens. That's the level of self-reliance he's talking about.
Okay, so if self-sufficiency is the foundation, Chapter 14 says the prince has to have a single-minded focus.
War. He says a prince must have no other aim, no other thought, but war and military discipline.
But not just during wartime.
No, especially in peacetime. That's when you prepare. He says you have to train your body by hunting. It makes you tough. But it also, and this is key, teaches you the actual terrain of your own kingdom.
And you have to train your mind.
Constantly. By reading history, studying the great leaders, Alexander, Caesar, Scipio. He talks about this Greek leader, Philopoemen, who would walk around the countryside with his friends and just constantly be running through strategic scenarios.
Where would the enemy attack from here? Where would we retreat?
Exactly. The goal is to always be mentally ready so that fortune can never catch you by surprise.
This focus on preparation leads us right into the most famous parts of the book. The prince's conduct. Let's start with money. You'd think a leader should be seen as generous, right?
That's what most people think, but Machiavelli says it's a huge mistake.
Why?
Because he argues that excessive generosity is totally self-defeating. If you're generous in a quiet, effective way, no one really notices. But if you try to build a public reputation for it, you just burn through all your money.
Which means you inevitably have to raise taxes.
And the second you start overtaxing people, you create hatred and contempt. And avoiding hatred and contempt is probably the #1 rule for survival in his book.
So better to just be seen as stingy.
It's better to accept a reputation for being frugal. It's a small price to pay in the short term to avoid creating regime-threatening hatred in the long term. He points to Pope Julius II, who was generous to get elected, then immediately tightened the purse strings to fund his wars.
That's a very practical way of looking at it. It's not a moral thing, it's strategic. Which brings us to the big one. Is it better to be loved or feared?
The classic question. And since it's almost impossible to be both, Machiavelli says it is far, far safer to be feared.
And his reasoning is pretty dark.
Very. He says love is held together by a bond of obligation, which men, being generally self-interested, will break whenever it's convenient. But fear...
Fear is held together by the dread of punishment.
Which, he notes dryly, never fails.
But he draws a very, very bright line. Fear is fine, but it can never, ever turn into hatred.
That's the absolute line in the sand. If you are hated, you're finished. So how do you manage it? He gives these incredibly practical rules.
They are.
#1, do not take the property or the women of your subjects. That's it.
He has that brutal line about it.
He does. Men forget the death of their father sooner than the loss of their patrimony. It's a stunning summary of human nature, that economic security trumps almost everything else.
Okay, so let's talk about cruelty. He says it can be justified, but only if it's well used. What does that mean?
Well-used cruelty is surgical. It's done out of absolute necessity to secure the state. It's applied all at once, and then it stops.
And then what?
And then it must be followed by acts of benevolence so the people can feel secure again. The worst thing you can do is have this ongoing, escalating cruelty that just creates terror and instability.
His prime example of this is Caesar Borgia.
It is. Borgia was seen as incredibly cruel, but his actions in the Romagna region were, to Machiavelli, a model of efficiency.
Because the region was lawless.
Total chaos, overrun with violent factions. Borgia came in, quickly and ruthlessly executed the main troublemakers, and brought order, peace, and stability. Machiavelli argues that Borgia was actually more merciful than the Florentines, who let massacres happen because they were too squeamish to act decisively.
So a short, sharp shock of violence can serve the greater good.
If it secures the state for the many. That's his logic.
Which brings us to keeping your word. If morality is secondary, should a prince even bother with promises?
Only when it serves his interests. This is where we get the famous metaphor of the fox and the lion.
Right.
He says, since men are generally wicked and won't keep their promises to you, you are under no obligation to keep your promises to them. You have to be a fox to recognize traps and a lion to scare off the wolves.
And he had a perfect contemporary example of this.
Pope Alexander VI. Machiavelli just marveled at him. He said Alexander never did anything but deceive people, and yet he was always successful. His deceptions always work.
So if you put all this together, the generosity, the fear, the cruelty, the lies, the main lesson is really about one thing.
Perception. It's all about controlling perception.
You don't actually have to be good.
No.
Yeah.
You just have to appear to be good. You don't need to have mercy or integrity or piety, but you absolutely must project the image that you do.
Because in the end, people only judge the outcome.
That's his point. For princes, there's no higher court to appeal to. So if you succeed in keeping the state safe and prosperous, your methods, no matter how ugly, will be seen as respectable by the masses. Success becomes its own justification.
Let's shift to the last two big ideas he tackles. Virtù and fortuna. And we really have to stress again, virtù is not virtue.
Not at all. It has nothing to do with Christian morality. Machiavelli's virtue is its effectiveness, skill, drive, determination.
The raw ability to do what needs to be done.
Exactly. And to seize an opportunity, what he called opportunita when it appears. A leader who acts successfully shows virtù, even if his actions were wicked.
And how much control does a prince's virtù have over fortuna, over luck or fate?
He tries to find a middle ground. He says fortune probably controls about half of our lives, but we control the other half.
He has that great analogy for it.
The raging river. He says fortune is like a flooding river, and when it hits, it's unstoppable. But
in the calm times, when the weather is good,
you can use your virtù to prepare. You can build dikes and embankments to manage the damage when the flood inevitably comes back. Foresight and preparation are everything.
So just sitting back and hoping for good luck is political suicide.
Completely. A prince who relies only on good fortune will be destroyed the moment it changes. The really hard part, which he admits is almost impossible, is changing your own nature to fit the times.
Which leads to his final and probably most provocative metaphor about fortune.
Yeah, in chapter 25, he just goes for it. He says, fortune is a woman, and if she's to be kept under, it is necessary to beat and coerce her. It's a shocking image. But his point is that audacity is better than caution. Fortune, he says, favors the bold. He points to Pope Julius II again, who always succeeded with these sudden, audacious moves, not slow deliberation.
So be bold. But no matter what, never forget that one central rule that holds it all together.
Avoid contempt and hatred. It's the ultimate defense, especially against internal conspiracies.
In chapter 19, he lists the exact qualities that make people despise a leader.
He does. Being seen as variable, frivolous, effeminate, cowardly, or indecisive. You have to project the opposite. Greatness, courage, gravity, and strength.
He uses the Roman emperors as the perfect case studies for this.
Yeah. He contrasts someone like Maximinus, who was despised for his low birth and hated for his cruelty and was overthrown very quickly, with a figure like Septimius Severus,
who was a master of political theater.
Oh, complete master. Severus was ruthless. He was both a fox and a lion, but he made sure his cruelty was always aimed outwards, or at clear threats to the state, never at the common people or their property. So he was feared, yes, but he was also respected for his competence. He was not despised.
And that's the ultimate Machiavellian win, isn't it? Competence disguised as virtue, all to preserve the state.
It is. So the manual is, be decisive, arm yourself, be frugal, be feared but not hated, and always, always control the public perception of your power.
But for all the cold cynicism, you have to remember how the book ends.
You do. It ends with this incredibly passionate plea, an exhortation to the Medici, to use these very techniques to free Italy from the barbarians, from foreign domination. It's a patriot's cry for help, wrapped in a ruthless political guide.
The book's legacy is just immense. The church immediately condemned it, called it the devil's work.
But then later, thinkers like Rousseau came along and said, wait a minute, maybe he's actually showing the people how tyranny works.
A handbook for recognizing a dictator.
Exactly. So whether you think it's a gangster's handbook, which is what Bertrand Russell called it, or just a cold scientific analysis of politics, it forces you to look at power as it really is, not as you wish it would be.
And that brings us to our final provocative thought for you, the listener. And it's tied directly to that idea of virtù.
Right. Remember that the word virtue, that strength, skill, resolve, it comes directly from the Latin word for man, which is ver.
He's explicitly coding these necessary hard qualities as manly.
He is.
Yeah.
And conversely, he codes the soft virtues,